Okay, we are live. What's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to our monthly free tech talk. This month is on WatchKit, January 2015, and we are here with Ben Morrow. WatchKit is the brand new set of APIs that lets us make apps for the Apple Watch. It's still in beta in Xcode 6.2. And although there are a lot of similarities between making apps for the iPhone and making WatchKit apps, there are a lot of big differences too. So that's what Ben's going to talk to you about today, what WatchKit is, how it works, and how it is different and similar to making iPhone apps. So here's today's schedule. First, Ben will give his tech talk, and then we'll open things up to Q&A. If you're watching this tech talk live, there's a Q&A tool where you can ask any questions you might have, and you can also upvote other people's questions. And later on in the talk, we'll go through the questions in rough order of upvotes. Also, you'll notice that there's this little applause feature that you can, if you like something about the tech talk, you can give a thumbs up, and I think it will cheer. And if you don't like something, you can give it the thumbs down, and everybody will boo, which just makes it kind of fun to get the pulse of the listeners as you're watching it live. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Ben. Ben is a tutorial team member on our site, and he is an author of our upcoming book, WatchKit by Tutorials, along with Scott Atkinson, Soheil Azarpour, Matthew Morey, Ryan Nystrom, Audrey Tam, and Jack Wu. Ben has been involved with WatchKit and Apple Watch stuff before WatchKit was even released. He ran a meetup group where he would talk about, hey, what do we think WatchKit's going to be like? Let's prototype some apps out, and so on. And then after WatchKit came out, he actually organized a big WatchKit hackathon in California with a lot of attendees and presentations prototyping some things you can do with the Apple Watch. So it's a pleasure to have Ben with us here today. And now I'll turn it over to Ben for his talk on WatchKit.
Ray, thanks so much for having me. What I'll do now is just go ahead and switch over to the screen share. So, as Ray said, my name is Ben Morrow, and you can reach me on Twitter at just my first and last name. And today we're going to talk about WatchKit. WatchKit was actually released right before Thanksgiving, and we'll talk about what we got and what we didn't get today. But right afterwards, as Ray mentioned, we had a hackathon, and 33 teams presented apps. There were some cool ones. The one that won used the dark sky weather API, and they could show when it's going to start raining or stop raining down to the minute and displayed a graph, and the judges really liked that. The second place one was an app that let you know what the crime rates were in the neighborhood you were walking through. So there's a lot of fun ideas out there, and what we can expect for the future is that right now Apple has been releasing iOS 8.2 betas and the Xcode betas associated with those. And probably sometime in February they'll kind of get that finalized, and then sometime in March they'll actually release the watch. So right after the watch comes out, we'll probably end up having another hackathon, and you could check it out there at hackathon.watch, and you can participate in person or remotely. So the Ray Wenderlich team, right after the WatchKit came out, they put together first impressions, and it was really a good coalescing of what we got. So we thought that we might only get notifications, but as it turns out, we got much more than that. The things that we got were, number one is split apps. So these are custom interactive user interfaces on the Apple Watch with the logic in an iOS app on your phone. And glances are something else. To get to a glance, you swipe up from the bottom of the watch display like you would to get Control Center on a phone or an iPad. And they kind of are a dashboard for the content within your app, and you only have one page to display what you want. When you tap on a glance, then it takes you to the app. So there's no kind of interactivity there. It's just a dashboard. And the notifications let you receive notifications that you expect. They're split into two levels, though. The first is a short look, and that shows just your app icon and some brief text. And if you keep your wrist raised up, Then it switches over to the long look where you can show more detail and even have action buttons, custom action buttons. So not just OK and cancel, you can write text in there, and when they tap on it, you can perform some custom function. So as I mentioned, the apps are actually split on the phone and on the watch, and so the watch houses just your views and your static images. So in the MVC platform, this is your view, and then on the phone you have your model and the controller. So all the code, all the logic that's happening is happening on the phone, and they're communicating over Bluetooth. And so when you tap a button on your watch, then it sends the button tap to the phone, and then the code actually runs on the phone to perform the action. So how does it work sharing data back and forth and communicating with the server? Well, because it's the iPhone, it's running iOS 8, it executes the code for the Apple Watch. The WatchKit uses exactly the same mechanism introduced in iOS 8 to share data between the extensions in the parent application. So instead of giving the watch its own core data stack, syncing with iCloud, or enabling it to manage its own file system, you simply need to use a shared app group. Apple recommends architecting your app so that the main app manages the syncing and updating of all the data. Sorry, 1 second, I just lost my... Okay. So Apple recommends architecting your app so that the main app manages all the syncing and updating of your data in the app group. If the new data comes from the web, the main app should update the shared group in the background so the new data is ready to use when the watch needs it. So now let's go over a few of the new things in WatchKit, different from what we have in normal iOS. So viewed from a high level, WatchKit is simply a bunch of classes and interfaces, builder additions, that you can wire together to get an Apple Watch app working. Some of the important classes are the WK Interface Controller. This is the Apple Watch version of the UI View controller, and you use that to control anything that's happening in your views. But on WatchKit, we don't call them views, we actually call them interfaces because they're kind of just displays of information. Then you have the WK Interface Object. So instead of shipping with a watch version of UIKit, WatchKit provides what would best be described as proxy objects for dealing with the user interface. So this class is the base for all watch controls like buttons and switches. And finally, the WK Interface Device, and this class gives you all the information you need to know about the watch, like the screen size and the locale. So whether you love them or hate them, you will build all of your user interfaces in storyboards, and that's currently the only way to create interface items and navigate between them. For the important methods, what I wanted to do is talk through kind of how you use things to navigate between those screens that I just mentioned. So first off, we use segues. So if you use storyboards before, you know about segues. And they work in WatchKit very similar to the way they work on iOS. You simply check the identifier string of the segue that's being performed and then return the relevant context. And so what that means is when you have one screen, you hook it up in Interface Builder with an arrow that points to another one, and that arrow is assigned a certain string, and then when you actually call that segue, then you give it some data. And so the next method, awake with context, is how you use the data. You can pass in an array or whatever you want, an ID or a string, and when it's called, then WatchKit has already prepared all your IB outlets, and so it can hook the data up immediately when the awake with context method gets called for a certain screen. And then the proxy object, so remember that all of your code is executed on the phone and then transmitted to the watch, and that means the code you write isn't immediately committed to the UI for display. So you don't set UI label dot text equals something. You use label dot set text instead. And so similarly with all the other attributes that you would have for any interface object. What kind of apps can you build? Well, they're kind of in two categories right now. The first is hierarchical. So to navigate to another destination, users must retrace all of their steps or make different choices. So a hierarchical model is good for complex app interaction. So this is what you get in, say, the Mail app on the phone, where you can go in your inbox and then click on a message and then do actions on that. And so that's kind of the hierarchy view. Whereas page-based has a little page indicators at the bottom there. You see blue and purple, and those you get through by swiping horizontally. And so when you look at glances on the watch, they use a page-based model, so you can swipe between all the different apps that have glances on your watch, and you can also use this model within your own app. So if you wanted to give the user different pages of, say, news content, you could do that in a page-based way. You cannot combine the styles, so at the design time you must kind of decide which one you want to do. So for example, you couldn't have a page that then triggers a hierarchy. So out of the gate, you'll need to support multiple screen sizes for the watch. Luckily for us, both watches shoot an aspect ratio of 4.5, so at least for now you won't have to do a ton of work to support the two screen sizes. But that doesn't mean you should hard code your interfaces for this aspect ratio, because Apple may very well introduce other sizes in the future. And so they've made it easy for us with a new paradigm called groups. So on the watch, auto layout is nowhere to be found. Instead, you add interface elements such as buttons and labels to a group, and it handles the layout for the items inside. You can nest groups inside of each other for more complex layouts, so that's the one on the right side there, and apply some slight styling like background color, margins, and corner radius. And you also cannot overlap items, so notice that anything that's within one of those groups is occupies that space, and you can't put something on top of it. But what you can do instead is use a background image behind it, and that can kind of help you create some layering in the app. So what about the limitations? Well, right now we don't have any access to the motion data, the heart rate sensor, the digital crown, the speaker, or the Taptic engine. So those things will function on the watch, and they will perform their tasks. Like, for example, the digital crown will let you scroll on pages, but we can't tap into it and get the data as the user is doing it. Strangely, also, interface animation is not supported because code's not running on the watch. So what we have to do is cycle through images like a GIF or a flipbook. And so people are creating a lot of interesting tools around how to create those images and how to deliver them to the watch. And also, the watch is tethered to the phone. So if you, say, walk too far away from your phone, or your phone runs out of batteries, then your watch app will also stop working. So, and right now, there's no way to cache information to keep it alive. So we are expecting that in the future, perhaps there might be some kind of native applications that can run as standalone, but right now you have to have your phone with your watch to have it functioning. So the Apple Watch should be coming out in the spring, probably in March, and then standalone native apps, we'll see maybe some after WWDC that happens in June. The vibration motor on the watch is extremely precise, and it feels like a light tap on your wrist. So the person next to you won't be able to tell that it's going off, but you will feel it. It's different than the phone. You can also feel different parts of the back face vibrate. So, for example, if you're using GPS direction, you could feel the difference between a right turn and a left turn vibration. The Apple Watch has a scroll wheel on the side, and that's known as the digital crown. And by spinning it, you can collect one-dimensional movement data to zoom maps and images and scroll through a list or a page. And then also there's a heart rate sensor that's collecting all of your heartbeats. You can tap and swipe on the screen just like an iPhone, with a few notable additions. Force touch is pressing hard down on the display, and that allows you to pop up a contextual menu. So right now we're pretty limited with what we can do with force touch, because we have to pop up the contextual menu. We can't use it to perform some other custom function in our app. But you could pop up the menu and then perform an action based on the button that you press. As I mentioned, swiping up from the bottom reveals the glances. And actionable notifications that come in either locally or remotely have configurable buttons. So a friend request from Facebook might have an add friend or a not now button to dismiss it. What kind of apps can you build? I think they're kind of in three categories: communication, fitness, and actionable information. So first we'll talk about communication apps. Apple's bundling in some cool ones, some that we can't even build. They have kind of different SDK to work with, but it's good to kind of think about the kinds of apps that people are going to be expecting on the watch. So the first one you see is a drawing app, and the person has drawn the flower, and over time the flower kind of fades away, and you can just draw back and forth with a friend like that. I think that's especially useful in Asian countries because they can communicate with characters instead of using words like we have to in Latin-based languages. The second one is just taps, so like 3 taps on your wrist might be able to mean something like let's go ahead and go to lunch. The third one is sharing your heartbeat with someone, so that's a very intimate experience that you might do with your significant other. And the fourth one is a walkie-talkie, so kind of quickly voice communicate back and forth with people. Next up is fitness, and Apple is bundling in some activity and an activity app and a workout app. And so the activity app kind of monitors your movement throughout the day and tells you when to stand up. The workout app is for like running, walking, cycling, so like short time-based duration things. And the apps will tie together with a phone, and so this is kind of a cool way to think about how am I going to like utilize data on the phone and on the watch, and what's the best way to display the information in those 2 platforms. The third is actionable information. And so in this screen you can see a glance actually on the left, and it has a timer that displays kind of the time remaining. Now that wouldn't be live updating, but you could kind of just look at it to quickly get a glance at where you are in the cooking process. And you see the page indicators there at the bottom, and if I swipe, then I'm going to go to a different app's glance. The one in the middle is the Lutron app, and so they're a kind of Internet of Things smart home company, and so you could use this to turn your lights off in your house or switch to a new color scheme or something like that, and they've designed that as a notification. And then finally are all of the apps that we're going to be able to build. Apple has partnered with some companies to launch the platform. And so, for example, American Airlines, Starwood Hotels, Citymapper, Pinterest, BMW, Major League Baseball, Honeywell, and Nike are all launch partners. So those are the types of apps you can build. And I should also mention that if you want to get started building apps, we are working on the WatchKit by Tutorials book, and so there will be a ton of great information in there and sample projects, and you'll also be able to kind of have this forum access where you can ask questions and things like that. So that said, let's go ahead and jump into Xcode, and we're going to quickly build an app from scratch and get a label on the screen that says Hello WatchKit. For that, I'm going to switch back over to my other display. And so notice that I'm using Xcode beta, and the reason why I'm doing that is that right now WatchKit is only in Xcode beta, so you need Xcode 6.2. The latest one is beta 4. And when you get it started, one second, you can go File, New Project, or do what I did and click New Project on the welcome screen. Once you're there, we'll just start with a single view application. And I'll call it Hello WatchKit label. All right, so right now, if I run my app in the simulator, you notice that I'm going to use an iPhone 6. Mhm. And after it loads up the welcome screen, then or the launch screen, then it just goes into a blank app. So that's what we expect. But notice that there's nothing displayed at all on the Apple Watch part of the simulator. So what are we going to do to fix that? Well,
Hey Ben, for the people who are new to this, can you show them how to reveal that WatchKit simulator?
um, yes. Well, this next part will reveal it for them. So what we'll do is go File, New Target, and right here we want iOS and Apple Watch and WatchKit app, and so it gives us that most of the time. And you can just go ahead and click Finish. You have the option to get a notification or a glance scene, but you can always add those later, so you don't need to worry about them at the beginning. Once you do that, it's going to ask you if you want to activate the scheme. This will actually allow us to use it, use our new WatchKit app in the simulator. So yes, we do want to activate it. And now you'll notice that we have our Hello WatchKit label app and our Hello WatchKit label WatchKit app. And so if we select that and run it, now it loads up on the Apple Watch instead. And you can tell that by the time and the charging icon, and so nothing's loaded on the phone this time. There is a way that you can use both apps at the same time, but it involves a little something complicated, and I'll try to include that in the notes after this is over. So if we browse through the files here, we see we have a WatchKit extension. So make this bigger. Yeah, the WatchKit extension and the WatchKit app. The WatchKit extension is what runs on your phone, and the WatchKit app is what actually runs on the watch. And you see that our interface controller, Swift code, is on the extension, and the storyboard is on the app. So let's look at the storyboard. And right now it's just blank, and we can go in the object library and just quickly get a label and drag it over there. And then we can hook that label up to our interface controller by getting the assistant editor, which looks like a Venn diagram, and then come in here and use the control key on my keyboard, and I'm going to drag right below the class definition. I'll just call it hello label. And then the awake with context function is what gets called as soon as this interface gets displayed. And so then I can use the code from in there to set the text for the hello label. And to do that, I'll just type hello label.setText. And so now, if we stop our previously running app and run it again, notice that now our label says hello WatchKit, so we hooked it up properly.
Hey Ben, can I chime in with one thing here?
Absolutely.
I just want to stress to everybody new to WatchKit how cool it is what's actually going on here, because Apple actually hides a lot of the complexity from you. Like looking at it in Interface Builder, we see the storyboard and we see the interface controller, and it's just like we're used to working with storyboards and view controllers. But actually, we have the storyboard, which is on the watch, and then we have the code, which is running on the phone. So how is that working? Because we just connected outlets just like we're used to. Well, actually, behind the scenes, it's sending messages wirelessly between the phone and your watch. So when you say hello label.setText, that's actually sending a message wirelessly between the phone and the watch to make that happen. So that is actually related to a question by Jeremiah Jessel right now, which I want to actually select and get everybody's thoughts on right now. And he says, since the code is processed on the phone, is there a performance lag between the watch and the phone? Do you want to chime in with that, Ben, or
Sure,
anybody
yeah.
else?
There is a performance lag, and so that's why we want the communication to be as lightweight as possible. Apple has actually been clever again, and they actually have it simulated in the simulator, so that if you try to do a bunch of say sending images or things like that, then you would see the lag that's there. But again, yeah, you definitely want to keep your communication as simple as possible because it's happening over Bluetooth, and if you've ever tried to send data with Bluetooth, you know how low bandwidth it is.
Okay, great, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was clear to everybody because it's a little confusing at first because they look like it's the same way you're used to working in Interface Builder, but you have to keep that performance in mind as you work with WatchKit apps.
Yeah, and so anything in this WatchKit extension is stored on the phone. Anything in the WatchKit app is stored on the watch itself. And so even the images that you put into your XC assets files here, if you want something, if you want to hook up an image in your WatchKit app in Interface Builder, you have to put it in this one, not in this one, because if you put it in this one, it'll only be on the phone and not on the watch. So that said, what I want to do next is kind of open up a larger project, and you can actually get the code for this. Sorry about you seeing my presenter view, but it's bit.ly/hello WatchKit. And if one of you guys can type that in the comments, then that would be great. So I'll just open it up here. Okay, so in this new app, we'll look at some of the key features of it. So first we'll look at the storyboard. And what we see in the storyboard is our entry point with the arrow there is this interface. So we started with our Hello WatchKit label, and now we've added 3 buttons below it and a separator line here to separate them. And so you see that my segues are connecting this interface over to the next interface, and the way that I did that was I control dragged from the view map button over to this new map interface that I created by dragging it in from the object library there. And so now let's run it and look at what happens when we press on that view map button. Computer's going a little slower than usual because of the video encoding happening on the Hangout.
While we're waiting for this to run, let's take another question by a guy whose name I cannot pronounce, so we'll call him Mr. P. But he says he's seen some comments online that says Swift and WatchKit doesn't work very well together, so if he's starting a WatchKit app now, does he need to use Objective-C? So, Ben, you want to take that one?
Sure, and we've got the other tutorial team members here as well, and so they can provide their experience. But from everything that I've seen, I haven't seen any issues with using Swift and WatchKit, and you know, Swift over time has gotten much more stable than it used to be back during the beta period. So have Mick or have any of you guys, tutorial team members, had any trouble with it?
Yeah, I mean, so we've done everything that we've done on the site on WatchKit has been exclusively in Swift from day one. And WatchKit by Tutorials, the upcoming book that both you and Ray mentioned earlier, is written exclusively in Swift. So Watch apps can very definitely be written exclusively in Swift without problem, I would say.
Yeah, even one of the sample app lister that Apple provides, they actually have two separate implementations. When you download the zip file, you get a Objective-C version and a Swift version. So it's good to see even Apple is sort of shipping the same app in both languages. Lets you see a nice side by side. So if you are having issues with it, that's a great place to look just to see how sort of Apple themselves have implemented WatchKit apps in both languages.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. It's running for you yet, Ben?
It's not running. Let me try to quickly download it again. And so you see, I'm just going into the GitHub, and I can press the download zip. There we go. Not sure what happened earlier, but luckily the one that you downloaded is working. So if I press view map, let me just put this iPhone out of the way. It's so funny because it worked just fine right before the talk, but that's how demos go, I guess.
Hey, Ben, I have it running over here, so why don't I share my screen and you just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do that.
That'll be good.
So I have the map showing right now.
Okay. All right, so yeah, so the map is showing, and what's displayed there is kind of a location and a certain zoom level, and so I guess we can switch back to my screen, and I'll just show the code quickly. So, so the code, we create a location, and then the coordinate span is kind of like the radius that's going to be displayed on the map. So how zoomed in do you want to be, and then you pick a pin color, and then you just set it with the location and that coordinate span. So it's pretty easy to display the map, and then you'd actually use your iPhone if you wanted to get, say, the current location and then display that on the watch as well.
So another thing that I wanted to point out about this, if you don't mind, is notice that it's not like a regular map view. It's a whole new class called WK Interface Map, and you'll find this pattern all throughout working with WatchKit. It's a whole new set of controls to get used to. Now, they're very similar to what you already know from iOS development, but they have some slight differences here and there as you go through them. And the other thing is, I'm going to switch back to my screen now. This is not interactive at all. I can't tap, I can't zoom, anything. It's just kind of like a image almost that's dynamically generated by the code that Ben just showed you right there.
So then if we go back to our storyboard and do the next thing. So if I click on the Browse Features button, then I'll come down here to this interface, but notice that it's not actually connected with a segue. Why is that? Let's look at our interface controller, and we see we have an action here for Browse button tapped, and that action creates an array of controllers, and the controllers, so this is a special function on array that you can give it the count for the number of items you want, and then you can have a repeated value. And so in this case, we'll call it a feature interface controller, which is another file here that we'll go over. But we created just a string of 3 controllers, and then we're going to pass in the context. So this function here, present controller with names, takes an array of controllers and passes in the context. Notice that the features are just glances, notifications, and apps. And those are also the same that we have in our images. We have glances, notifications, and apps. And so now my simulator is still not working. Let me try quitting my simulator. Try it one more time. If not, then we'll just switch back and forth between me and Ray. Okay, good. That worked this time. So it loads up with a label and an image, and it's a page-based layout, so you can swipe. And notice how, there is a little delay in the interaction. You can see the little activity indicator there. Interestingly enough, as a developer, we don't have access to the activity indicator. The watch just kind of shows it when it's loading things. So now let's look at our feature interface controller. So when when we tap the browse button and it calls up the feature interface controller, when they get awoken with the context, then we just set the image and set the text. And so you can see that this is our label and this is our image. So all it's doing is just setting each of those. And how did I get the page indicators at the bottom to be able to swipe through? That magic literally happens with just this method call here, because it has if you say present controller with name, then it'll just show a single screen as a modal. But if you say present controller with names with an S, then it'll use the page indicator based navigation. And then finally, if I click on the See Minions button, we actually have that hooked up with a segue. And this time it's hooked up to a table interface. So you can see kind of a prototype cell here that has an image and a label inside of it. And that in turn, so if we tap on this cell in the table, then it will load up a new one with, again, a label and an image. So it's really similar to how that one looks. So let's try that out. So because I used the present controller with names, then it's a modal dialog, so it has like a cancel button at the top, so I just press that to get back. And if I press on the See Minions, then it loads those in there, and if I press on a single one, then it will load the detail view up. So let's look at how I accomplish that. Well, the first thing, as you might have noticed, is I have all of my images with each minion name associated with it in my WatchKit app XC assets. And then so notice that the minion row controller just has the label and the image, as we'd expect. And then we have a table interface controller that provides more of the logic. So when this one, awake with context, so awake with context is kind of like the view did load in iOS world. Tables work much simpler on the watch than they do in iOS, because you don't need to dequeue reusable cells or anything like that. You just set the number of rows that you're going to have with the count and the type, and then you go through, and so what I'm doing is going through this array here, and I use enumerate so that I can get the value and the index number. And that way I can assign to a certain row with the index number. And I can just say row.image and row.minion name label and set the image and set the text. And so then I have another method, context for segue with identifier. So here is where when I tap on one of the rows, it's going to call this method, and it's just going to return my minion name as the context. So if I tap on the Bob, it's just going to return a string called Bob. And so when that gets passed into the details controller, and I'll awake with context, so I'm passed in my Bob string, and it's going to set the text for the detail view name and set the text for the image. And so we'll look at that again. So I tap on, keep it the same, tap on Bob, so it passes over the Bob string and sets the text and the image.
Hey, Ben, there's a question that came in from a listener that I think would make sense to address now.
Sure.
It's from Bevy Harwood, and the question is, was that just a mix of the two types of navigation, hierarchy and pagination that you showed us?
Yes. Oh, well, this isn't a mix. This is like kind of so I see what she's asking. When I press on right now, most of this stuff is hierarchy based because I'm pressing on something and you see a new screen. When I do browse features, it's presented in kind of a modal dialog. So you could do that, where you could present it in a modal dialog, and then it's allowed to have kind of a different navigation scheme.
So usually, what you're saying is usually you choose one or the other, except when you present something modally, and then you can switch.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. So, any other questions before we leave the code here?
There's a lot more, but we'll get to those in the Q&A period.
Got it. Okay. So, I will say that we're going to have a kind of post that has the video slides and code after this talk, and I'll also try to capture any of the questions that are asked and any of the answers that I'm able to give or anything we need to research, because a lot of times we have to research things. And with that, my name is Ben Morrow, and I'll turn it back over to Ray.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was a really great overview of WatchKit, and I really enjoyed the demo as well. At this point, we're going to open things up to Q&A, so keep your questions coming and keep the upvotes coming as well. We're going to go through them in rough order of upvotes. But before we get into that today, I wanted to introduce 3 people that are actually with us here from the tutorial team who might be chiming in for the Q&A. And they're Mick Pringle, who's the Final Pass editor on WatchKit by Tutorials. I noticed Ryan Nystrom is here too, who's the lead author of WatchKit by Tutorials, so I'm going to put him on the spot too in a second. And finally, we have Greg Hio, who's done some video tutorials on WatchKit. So if we could do a real quick introduction of each of you. Mick, can you give us a real quick overview of how WatchKit by Tutorials is coming along so far and when people can expect the book will be released?
Yeah, so first, just to give you a little background about the book, WatchKit by Tutorials we're currently working on it, and it's designed to sort of teach the reader everything that they need to know to be able to build some really high quality watch apps. It's written sort of in the same unique style that's associated with the rest of the by Tutorial series, and it's going to take the reader from their very first sort of hello world like watch app, such as Ben displayed earlier in his presentation, right through to building out this sort of really feature-rich recipes management app that has full support for glances, handoff, sharing data, notifications, and all the other really great Apple Watch features. And I know sort of Ray mentioned it a little earlier, but we've been really lucky to get this amazing writing team working on the book, which consists of some really experienced authors, Sahil Azarpour, Matthew Morey, Jack Wu, Audrey Tam, Scott Atkinson, Ryan Nystrom, and of course Ben. The book's about 50% complete as it stands, and the first set of chapters are currently going through the editorial process, but we are on schedule for a late February, early March launch, which will hopefully coincide with the launch of the watch, but we're not dependent on that. And here's the best bit: if you pre-order the book now, you will save $10 off the book price, and you can do that via our online shop.
Okay, thanks so much, Mick. And I was going to let Ryan talk a little bit about what he's doing with the book, too, because he's the lead author on the book, but I just received word that he's in a loud working environment right now, so can't really talk. So I'll just say real quick, Ryan's our lead author of the book, which means that he was the one responsible for the main sample project that goes through our book. Unlike a lot of our books, we have one kind of big sample project that goes across most of the chapters because that tends to work really well for this particular book. So Ryan came up with that idea and is sort of coordinating that. And he's also working on the sort of beginner chapters of the book to make sure it flows really well and gets everybody started on the right foot. So that's Ryan, and you should see him on video right now. Wave Ryan. That's Ryan. All right, and then we'll end up with Greg. Real quick, Greg, can you talk about your WatchKit video tutorial series, which you've done with Mick, and how it differs from the book?
Yeah, the video tutorial series really takes you from the beginning. So there's a really sample iOS-only app, and then the first few videos take you through the steps of sort of adding the watch extension and adding the basic interface elements to that. So it covers the basics of labels and switches and things like that. It does cover some of the navigation sort of base things that Ben mentioned as well, how you can have the hierarchy that's sort of like a navigation controller, as well as that versus the modal display and using pages there. So it does cover that kind of navigation and that side of it. And then later on, Mick takes over for some more advanced topics like sharing data between the watch and the app and things like that. So it really is a sort of start from nothing, add new target, and then takes you through building from interface to data, core data, sharing data, things like that.
So would you say that it depends on your learning style? If you prefer videos, then watch the video series. If you prefer reading, then check out the book?
I think so, because the book does take you sort of step by step through it as well, but there's really something to be said for videos, and you get the thrill of watching me and Mick type things out, which is always nice, drag things around the interface builder, so it really is different styles, but I think the videos are available now, and they really do take you in from the beginning, and there are a couple of sample projects, so I do like the idea of the book taking one project and building it through all the steps, so that's another difference between the two.
Okay, great. The reason I introduced everybody is because now that we're in the Q&A period, I'd like to open it up so that anybody who wants to chime in between Mick, Greg, and Ben can do so. And Ryan, if he has anything to say it in the chat, and I'll make sure that the message gets through here. All right, so we're going to proceed into Q&A here, and we're going to start with a question from, again, the guy's name I can't pronounce, so we'll call him Mr. P. And he says, how does the WatchKit work with push or remote notifications, and can this be tested on the simulator?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit with that. You can do remote and local notifications. Mick or Greg, have you guys worked with that more? Maybe you can talk to it.
Yeah, so I did a video on notifications, and you can test them in the simulator, but all notifications are treated as local notifications because obviously you've not got a remote server sat in the background pushing to the simulator. I mean, that's the same restriction as iOS apps. So the way that you test them in the simulator is that you provide a JSON file which contains the same set of keys and values that you would use in the JSON payload that you pushed to your push notification server, and then it takes that and launches the notification directly in the simulator, and you can actually set up a separate scheme in the scheme editor at the top of Xcode to launch straight into your notification. You don't have to go into the app or wait for something to be pushed. You can just go straight in.
Okay, perfect. Next, we have a question from tutorial team member Chris Wagner, and he says, if I use core data in my container app, can the watch also use core data APIs, or do I need to pass simpler models back and forth? And in particular, can I use NSManaged object and NSManaged object context?
I'll defer to Mick again, since he's worked with that.
As far as I'm aware, you can use the core data APIs. I think that's what we did without problem in the sample apps that we used in the video series. And I know it's being used in the book as well. The code that you would use runs on the phone, not on the watch, and all those APIs are available just like they are in any other type of extension.
Yeah, as you mentioned in your question, you said it's a container app, so you do have to have that shared container set up, and it's just like an extension. So you have the XC data model and all of your model files. You just need to make sure they're included in the watch app extension target, and then you can use the models and all the core data stuff as you would. As Mick said, it's running on the phone. The code is running on the phone, so you do have core data available there to you.
And Ryan brought up a good point. He said performance isn't really an issue because the phone CPU is running it. Okay, moving on. We have a question here about iBeacons from Ben Thomas. And he says, do you think WatchKit apps will help mainstream adoption with iBeacons? What are good examples of how Apple Watch and iBeacons can be paired? And will any iBeacon Apple Watch communication be featured in WatchKit by tutorials?
So I'll take the first part of the question. I'll let the other guys answer about the book. But I think, yes, that iBeacon adoption can be helped by the watch. Kind of a similar but unrelated thing is Apple Pay, because you'll be able to use Apple Pay with just your watch. And a good example of kind of location-based stuff with the watch is the Pinterest app. So in Pinterest, when you favorite photos, then the ones that you're around, location-wise, will actually pop up a notification on your watch, so you know like where you can go see, say, the Painted Ladies' houses in San Francisco. If you're within walking distance to them, then it will pop that up. So you could do a similar thing with iBeacons. Pop a notification. You're around this. Maybe you should go check it out.
So I guess it's like a convenience factor, I guess, because since you have the watch on your wrist, if you get a pop-up that say you're near something, you're more likely to pay attention than having to pull out your watch and look at it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that area. Okay, our next question is from Niklas Modin about using the watch as an activity tracker. Since watch apps don't work without a phone, how do I have to carry the phone around to have it track my activity?
So by tracking activity, maybe means steps, and so I believe the watch will be able to track that without the phone. But if you want internet or GPS or things like that, then you'll need to have the phone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next up is from Jeremiah Jessel, and he's asking, what is the storage capacity for storing apps, images, and content on the Apple Watch?
First I'll say that remember that what is actually stored on the watch is just your storyboard and your images that you put in it. And right now we can't, for example, play videos or audio on the watch, so that won't be stored on there. So the storage, if it's just storyboards and images, should be relatively small. I've heard that it's like an 8 GB device, but that doesn't really matter for us. Have any of the tutorials team members run into any issues where you have storage limitations?
I mean, I've not come across anything personally, but then the stuff we've been doing isn't like of any great scale. I mean, all I would, so two things really to mention, I think. I've not come across any size limitations in any of Apple's documents anywhere on what can be, where the sort of limit would be with that. But I do know that there is a 20 meg image cache on the actual phone itself. So when you're using images in image cache, you're only allowed to use up to 20 meg. And then the other thing to point out is that app installation, I don't think, goes across the Bluetooth connection, because the watch also does have Wi-Fi, but it's just we don't have access to it. It's managed by the OS itself. And I think using Wi-Fi is installing apps is one of the areas where that Wi-Fi connection would be used, and it would probably set up a sort of ad hoc Wi-Fi network between the phone and the watch to be able to do that. And obviously then if you're going over Wi-Fi, any size limit is going to be greater than it would be if you were trying to get some package across Bluetooth LE.
Also for the image cache, I think that's, did you say it was 20? I can't remember if it was 10 or 20 meg, but that's on a per app basis. Is that right, Mick?
Yeah, 20 meg per app.
Right. So you can sort of, if you have an image locally on the phone and you push it over to the watch, then you can sort of keep pushing images over to your cache, and then the watch will eventually they'll fall off the end of the watch eventually, and then you can tell whether they're there or not, whether you need to resend it. But yeah, you do get a little bit of per app space carved out for the cache.
I think Apple probably do have to be quite lenient with the size of the bundle that can be pushed to the phone, since the way that we're going to be doing animation is by having a series of images and animating them. It's like you can't give with one hand and then take with the other. I think, there's got to be some give and take. So because there's nothing mentioned in any of the docs, it's not something that really we've given much thought to at this point.
Great, thanks guys. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one, and I'll actually take this one real quick, and I apologize for this. From Ben Thomas. Sorry guys, you forgot to mention if iBeacon communication will be mentioned in the book. Good point, we forgot to answer that. It's not going to be mentioned in the book, correct me if I'm wrong, Mick, because we didn't really think of it as something that needed to be covered in the WatchKit book, because it's not WatchKit specific. I mean, once you're running code in the extension, you can access other APIs on your phone, like iBeacon, so I didn't really see the point of including it in that book. If you do want to learn about iBeacon, Chris Wagner, a tutorial team member, actually wrote a chapter on that in iOS 7 by tutorials, which is now updated to work on iOS 8, so that would be a good starting point. I think there might be a free version of the tutorial on the site as well. Does anybody else have anything else to chime in about that, Nick or Ryan?
I'll mention one more thing real quick. That is that Apple recommends not only like iBeacon stuff, but also like just network communication. So communicating with an API, that actually happens in your iOS app, so not even your WatchKit extension, because the WatchKit extension can be killed at any time. So if you want to do iBeacon, you want to do talking to an API, that happens in your iPhone app.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning as well is that the extension that's running on the iPhone and the iPhone app itself can't wake the app up on the watch. So even if you had some code running which was monitoring for iBeacons in the iOS app, you would have to come up with some quite smart scheme, probably sort of generate local notifications, which then iOS would send to the watch, which you would then action on the watch to launch the watch app. You couldn't push straight from the WatchKit extension to the watch app itself.
Right, you could, but you could make a notification that, then you get the Apple.
Yeah, you've just got to get a little bit creative with your thinking because of the disconnect between the device, the extension, and the watch itself.
Great point. Thanks for bringing that up, guys. Okay, we're running low on time, so I'm just going to add on one more question. We have a lot of great questions. I wish I could get to them all, but we're running low on time. So anyway, last question is one that one of our tutorial team members had, and it is speculation time. So right now, we only have limited access to what we can do on WatchKit. Our apps are not native yet, right? We got to go through this whole rigmarole where we have extensions, where some's code running on the phone. But in the future, rumors are that we'll be able to actually have native apps. What do you guys think that's going to be like? What does the future look like for WatchKit?
So I'll start, and then the other guys can hop in when they want to. But the thing is, the native SDK will probably be enabled in pieces, just like, say, backgrounding or communication between apps were in iOS in general. So while there will be more kind of reading sensor data, probably indirectly, maybe some microphone stuff, a bit maybe more like UI animation stuff, it's unlikely that we'll be given full reign to just like have an app installed on the watch and just have it running all the time, because then battery life would be in the toilet. So you'll probably be able to get some motion data, the digital crown data, the Taptic engine, communicate with that, but just having an app installed on the watch is probably not going to happen for a couple of years.
Any other comments to add, Greg or Mick?
I mean, one thing that I would stress is like, don't try and look too far beyond what we've got now, and don't worry about like the limitations of what we've got now, because I think we've proved with the apps in the video series and the one that definitely that's in the WatchKit by Tutorials book, you can still produce some really feature-rich watch apps that provide a lot of usability and features with what we have now. So looking forward to what we might get in WWDC and beyond is great, and one of those things will probably be native apps. Like, don't let that put you off working with what we have now, because what we have now whilst it might not be fully native app, still delivers a lot of power, you know, and as long as you can come up with some great ideas and get a little bit creative with the way you use it.
Great point. Okay, well, that's all the time we have, so we're going to have to wrap up things for here. But first, I wanted to say thank you so much, Ben, for putting this great talk together.
My pleasure.
I also wanted to have a chance to say thank you to Ryan, Mick, and Greg for answering some of the questions along the way. Okay, so remember we have these tech talks every month, and we're going to have another one, of course, in February, so stay tuned for the sidebar of our site. Once we know when that is, then I'll put a post up there. You can sign up just like you did for this one. And that's it. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this tech talk, and we'll see you next time.